It's no secret that Gloomhaven has quite the high skill floor, but it also has quite the high skill ceiling. There's a pretty significant difference between basic play and some elite gamer moves. But more seriously, there's a lot of things that one can do and keep in mind while they're playing that can make you just more proficient and possibly just make scenarios easier. And the goal here is just to improve so you don't have to fail scenarios and have to replay them again. If you want to support the channel, be sure to like and remember to subscribe if you want to be kept up to date with all the upcoming fun Frosthaven content. Something I want to emphasize, and this is something that you'll notice, is just versatility can play a big deal in how successful you are in Gloomhaven. Monsters draw monster behavior cards, your players are going to be playing certain actions, and there's a certain measure of unpredictability. So if you pick cards that are only going to do X and Y on your turn, and you're not prepared for something to go awry, unless you've got the initiative card that you just know is going to land, you have some measure of knowledge that it's going to be successful. A lot of times, certain turns can be just, you'll either interfere with an ally or the monsters will draw a card that just is like, oops, guess that's not going to work out. So something to keep in mind while you're playing is if you're picking a turn, try to pick some cards that you have an alternative strategy if you need to just back out, or perhaps you're like, well, the enemies aren't attacking this turn, so stunning them isn't going to do anything. Try to pick cards that give you options. Try to bring cards to the scenarios that give you options. And as you level up, sometimes there's a really cool effects, but then some of the alternatives will give you things that are just universally useful on both halves of the card. That kind of versatility is amazing because those dead turns often is usually where the effort starts to fall. Like you see, like, ah, crap, they drew that initiative 15 and now they're doing something early and it screwed over my turn. And that sucks. But you can prepare for it. If you hear like an ally saying, hey, I'm going to be doing this, try to prepare for it and give yourself options on your turn. And a lot of times I'll lean into items that can optimize what I can do on my turn. So if I'm like, I'm about to kick in the door, I'm going to have items that I can use my movement to, if I need to charge in there and get in there immediately, I've got enough movement to get in there, or I've got enough to back out. If I'm like, okay, we've seen what they've drawn, it's no good, let's back out, let them move to us, and that's fine. Having that versatility, so you're like, well, I landed on the door, I have no more movement. Sometimes not being prepared, not being versatile, not being ready is often what leads to failures more than just not doing enough damage. Although the best way to get rid of enemies and stop them from murdering you is killing them, hard crowd control is invaluable. A lot of the Frosthaven classes just do more damage overall than some of the Gloomhaven classes, and that's just as an increased floor. You'll see some of the most obscene Gloomhaven classes are still going to be some of the kings and queens of damage, but while you're not killing them, or if you've opened a room with 4 annoying imps and 4 annoying harrowers, you're like, well, you're not going to kill all 8 of those in one attack unless you're, we're not going to get into the nuance of when you can do that. But if you're not ready to just completely blow up a room and they're about to just destroy you, a lot of times hard crowd control goes a long way. Melee enemies, immobilize them at range and just watch as you can just start picking out, ruining their turns. Stuns are invaluable. Now, a lot of people have taken note that the Gloomhaven classes, especially on the starters, have more non-loss stuns and disarms than the Frosthaven ones, which a lot of them are built into their losses. Keep in mind, although the Frosthaven classes have better healing, better loots, where they're not just loot one, they're just seemingly more powerful than the Gloomhaven starters. Their hard crowd control via stuns and disarms are notably decreased. So that doesn't mean you can't use stuns at all in Frosthaven, but it does mean you might have to burn some losses to get those effects. So, and they are worth it, don't get me wrong, because sometimes there's like some loss heals that only end up mitigating somewhere around 6 damage, but we've had turns in Frosthaven where we had a stun and an attack 4 built into one of Gemma's cards. So it did 4 points of effort and then prevented an enemy from swinging on us for about 4, and then we were able to move away from it next turn, preventing its next turn from swinging. It overall mitigated over 10 damage just because we had the ability to stun it, move away, and then pounce on it the turn after when it finally caught up to us. Using your stuns effectively and then being sure to bring the ability to immobilize, to disarm, and stun goes such a long way. So in between stuns, disarms, and killing them, what can you do to help mitigate the damage? And movement and positioning is critical. I know a lot of people think like, oh, I want to go early. Like, if people are used to Dungeons and Dragons, and the biggest part of Dungeons and Dragons is you roll initiative, and you want to roll high, so you're going first every round. And going first every round is not necessarily advantageous in Gloomhaven, because sometimes you want to go late and then go early, so you initiative weave. But also, movement weaving is another way, because if you have enough movement to go in late, get in, hit them, you can also go in early, move in, out, and watch them just move to you. You can effectively stun them with movement. Move in, move out. Position yourself to where you will take the fewest amount of attacks. Discuss between the group, where can we stand that we will mitigate less attacks. And then also, if you're like going into a room and someone's kicking it in early, consider going as late as possible. So all the monsters have moved in, and then jumping in, and then doing the initiative weave out. It's pretty basic stuff there. I know a lot of people have talked about, oh, we know what initiative weaving is, but movement and positioning is so much more. Also blocking things up, because especially melee attackers, if they don't have a ranged card or any form of ranged attack, it's incredibly easy with tight spaces to confuse and annoy melee enemies. And too many times people are like, let's run in and kill them. No, let them come back. You might have like one dead turn. And I know I was talking about reducing dead turns, and that's why I was talking about having versatility, like bringing cards that are not necessarily attacks, like, blessing and strengthening or healing, but having the ability to hold them, bring them to you, and then being able to fight them there. It is annoying when you've got like a bunch of melee enemies blocking the door and then ranged enemies behind them. Yes, but that's something you're going to have to prepare for. Remember to pace yourself, though. Although I do encourage people to not burn too many losses, I think depending on your hand size, like the Geminate and the Tinkerer, certainly have more capacity to start burning early losses. If the first room looks so brutal that you don't think you can get it through it without losses, burn it. However, don't just be like burning losses all willy-nilly. And this is another thing that I think is very interesting. Burn only enough losses that you think you're going to be able to use your non-loss attacks to start comfortably moving through, because it does screw up your stamina curve. So let's take a 12-hand class, which is pretty significant. If you burn one loss in the first room, you play 6 turns, and then you rest. You're down from 12 down to 10. That still gives you 5 more turns before you need to rest again. But the moment you take that second loss, or you have to use a loss to mitigate damage, at that point, now you're down to 9, and you're only at 4 plays. Then, if you play a loss during that cycle, you're down to 7, down to 3. So you quickly actually start damaging your stamina curve. If you start burning 2 losses in a rest, if you do it during the first cycle versus the second or third cycle, you'll actually get further, because the longer you can hold on to these losses, the longer you can prevent yourself from burning these. I know you have to burn them to rest, and you're going to have to eventually lose cards. But if you can hold off just a little bit, sometimes you can get a lot more out of it. This is especially important once you start to get more finicky scenarios that are say, hey, get in here, get this, and then get all the way back to the entrance. Or be sure to wind through this whole mazy thing. Not all the scenarios are going to be kill all enemies, especially once you start to get to Frosthaven, where you start to notice that there's a lot more scenarios that aren't just kill all enemies. And you realize, oh no, I have to start worrying about other things than just maximizing my damage. However, some scenarios are incredibly rigid in what they are doing. Like, there's one scenario that says, just survive for 10 rounds. If you don't burn any losses, if you're a 10 card class and you don't burn any losses on the first rest cycle, short rest, but by the time, on the last turn, you're down to 8 cards. You don't need to only be at 8 cards. You can be down to 2 at the end for all you care. But if it's just survive for 10 rounds, go crazy. However, that doesn't mean to necessarily just burn losses all willy-nilly, because if you just burn all losses during the first thing, you might not last till the 7th turn. But pace yourself according to the scenario. Don't just try to use the same strategy every time. So if the first room looks hard, keep in mind that burning losses early will hurt your long-term stamina, but it's in many cases very worth it, especially if you're a Geminate. I already talked a little bit about weaving in with movement and initiative, but one of the things I hate about initiative is cards that have a 48 or a 50 somewhere in there in initiative, because I hate going middle unless I don't know. Those are my least favorite numbers. I love to see high numbers and I love to see low. So be sure to bring a good initiative spread. So if you're like playing a class, and you're like, hey, here are my cards, try to deliberately bring some early cards. Sometimes you don't even necessarily like the effect on the card, but like one of the Cragheart's cards, Unstable Upheaval, I do like the top, but it is a double loss. So you're thinking, wow, this double loss is kind of, you've got a situational top and the bottom, which is basically a move 2. However, it is your only early initiative at 13, and it is your only way to beat some of those annoying like 15 initiatives. There's several times where if you do not bring Unstable Upheaval, you are going to be incredibly hurt in the ability to, well, I need to go before the enemies, but if they do this, and it's always when you're like, well, I'm good unless they do this. That's always when they draw it, and it's super annoying. The biggest part about this, though, is be sure to bring those late initiatives and be sure to bring those early initiatives. Of course, you have classes like the Scoundrel, which have an incredible spread, where you can very easily pick 2 cards under Initiative 7, as well as 2 cards above Initiative 70. And you'll be able to very, very easily control, are you going very early or very late? And just bring some in the middle, because sometimes you will want to go like, all right, I want to go early, but not too early. So you do have some options in there, especially for the Scoundrel. Scoundrel is one of the better initiative controls that I've seen, but you have also people like the Mind Thief, which has a pretty solid one as well. And another example being the Spellweaver's Mana Bolt. Although the Mana Bolt has many things that make it incredible. A heal 3 on an Initiative 7, a decent attack on Initiative 7, but Mana Bolt's a core card for the Spellweaver, if only because Initiative 7 is the only really early initiative you're going to have. And you do have that pip on the bottom of Mana Bolt, which you can put a strengthen on that makes it incredibly powerful. Speaking of enhancement dots, that's something to take note of, because there's a big significant difference between what I've seen some people talk about in play. For example, being able to put strengthen on bottom actions, which is notably more difficult in Frosthaven. If you've taken just a look at the starters, that doesn't mean it's impossible, and it doesn't mean that that's like too broken, but it's hard to turn down, because you can often use the bottom, strengthen yourself mid-turn, and then do a top action where you have advantage on all the attacks for that. Then during your next round, for either half of the card, get advantage on all those. It effectively gives you 3 halves of a card with advantage on all of those attacks, which in some cases for multi-attack classes is incredible. Now, of course, that's why you have it like the Mind Thief, who can very easily, very few of their attacks are under 4 because of the Mind's weakness, and it can very easily get attacks much higher. And the Spellweaver, who often can do losses resulting in multiple attack 3s and 4s during a turn, so being able to say, hey, I'm going to be performing 4 attack 3s, and then being able to turn that into 4 attack 3s with advantage very easily. That's incredibly strong. But however, Frosthaven has a few more pips, but they're a little bit more restrictive. But keep in mind for those, if you can see that you can put big status effects on them, especially with Frosthaven being a little bit more lenient with enhancement costs, do it. Take note of that. Don't just forget about it, because I think a lot of people just look at the cards and don't really take a look at what you can truly enhance. There's some really cool options. I already talked about strengthening, but also sometimes there's some easy ways to bless yourself. Sometimes there's easy ways to multi-target bless, multi-target curse, although multi-target curse is significantly more difficult now. And of course, we did notice that disarm has been removed from the enhancement chart in Frosthaven, so keep that in mind. Although anytime someone did a multi-target disarm on any of the enhancements in Gloomhaven, those all ended up being way too powerful, and it's a good thing it was removed. So reviewing an earlier point I was talking about, we were discussing just watch people like they get into melee and then just fight back and forth until something dies. Traditional RPG rules don't really work out. There's not really any true tanks, although I do have to say that there are indeed a couple ways you can tank in Gloomhaven. Frosthaven does give most classes a little bit more durability, which is actually really nice in my opinion. Frosthaven has, and I'm not going to talk about too much about the locked classes because I can't, but having one dedicated healer, one dedicated tank, and then some damage dealers is just not an optimal way. Everyone should try to bring some ability to self-sustain. I know when I'm picking out cards, I want to bring some sort of self-healing or defensive ability. When I'm picking a brute, I do bring some self-heals. It surprises me when it just goes awry and people are like, I need heals. Well, I do have heals, but I don't have enough to keep you alive when you took so much. You shouldn't have been tanking, and you should have brought some heals. bring a little bit of healing, and that goes a long way. Now, of course, you've got like the Tinkerer who can bring multiple heals, and they're like, hey guys, here's a bunch of healing. Unless you're doing that like between rooms to help top people off when they're like resting and stuff. Or maybe we're trying to kite the enemies, they're out of range, and getting a little bit of a health refill between those. You shouldn't be actively healing during combat. If you can be hitting enemies, crowd controlling enemies, dealing damage, knocking them into traps, you should be doing that. Now, of course, if you have a friend at 2 health and you're about to start a turn and you can heal them, you probably should. But usually in those situations, there's something has gone wrong. I've been in those situations. Not everyone's perfect. There's ways to get out of them, and you shouldn't have to completely bank on one of your characters in your party. It is interesting when some people are like, man, the Tinkerer is so powerful because I've got all these heals. What happens if you don't have a Tinkerer in your party? Just play better. Learn to be more self-sufficient. Learn to position yourself better so you don't need healing just to survive a combat. This doesn't mean that you shouldn't ever tank and that you shouldn't ever heal. There are some situational cards where for some turns, hey, I can position myself to take hits and then you guys can do your thing. Or hey, you know what? We're going to kick open this door. Before you do that, I'm going to heal all you up. Do all those things, but don't just have, I am the healer, I heal, I am the tank, I'm taking the hits. Split up as much of the work as you can and it'll go much more smoothly. You should find more creative ways to avoid damage. Now, we've already gone over initiative control and movement, but also there's interesting ways. I think a lot of people see like, you have a couple classes that can disarm traps. You know what my favorite way of disarming traps is? The Brute or the Mind Thief, and that is via push. My favorite way of disarming traps is using Fearsome Blades push 3 and just knocking enemies into them. If I can knock them into multiple traps, absolutely. I love it. Not only that, but traps tend to be pretty valuable for the scenario, and sometimes they have really annoying status effects. It's really funny when you get like immobilized traps and like knock melee enemies into them, so now they're like poisoned and immobilized or stuff like that, or damaged and immobilized. It's always hilarious because it effectively gives you a free stun built into some of your push attacks. And like you see attacks that are like, well, this is a push, like the Mind Thief's Fearsome Blade with Mind's Weakness in play is just an attack 4, push 3. Attack 4 is pretty decent, it's not bad, and push 3 is significant. A lot of enemies actually have 3 movement and will be able to get back. Not all of them, but plenty do. However, a lot of times you can push enemies into spaces where they aren't going to, or you can knock them away and move away, or knock them into traps. Consider pulling range enemies closer and moving them to where they are going to have to attack with disadvantage. Consider forcing enemies that have multi-targets to just waste those multi-target turns targeting single targets. A lot of the payoffs in Gloomhaven comes not necessarily from stunning enemies, which is incredibly important, and I do say hard crowd control is powerful, but in the interim there's other ways to help mitigate damage if you're creative enough. I'm a little boring with perks, but I'm still going to say it, take out the negatives ones first, because I know a lot of times you really love that big, like, oh, I love that +3, and trust me, I do too. Those are super fun, especially on your hatchet, and you're like, all right, here's an attack 6. Oh shit, that's 9 damage. Hell yeah. But the worst thing is if you're like, all right, I'm going to do this attack 4, they've got shield 1, draw the -2, and like, oh, well, crap, I thought the 4 was going to be good, and it should be good, but if you leave that -2 in there, this is super annoying. Now, some classes don't have the ability to remove the -2. Some classes have that really awful perk that adds another -2. I'm looking at you, Craighart. But in general, one of my favorite perk in the game is just straight up, and it's boring. Remove 2 -1 cards from your deck. Yeah, it's boring, but it's also amazing. Taking a look in Frosthaven, you'll see that there's less of those straightforward remove the -2 card, remove 2 -1s, and don't worry, some of them still exist like that. And you start to see like replace 2 +0s with some cool rolling effects, especially with the new rolling modifier rules. Rolling modifiers are a little bit more in, but turning base cards, especially zeros or negatives, into rollings are actually really strong, because if you can take those out and add another cool effect, not only are you going to be rolling less negatives or zeros to begin with, but you now have put more powerful effects in your deck. So I do really like those, but before I start adding like replacing the +1s with +2s and whatnot, I focus way more on just removing the negatives first. Often You will often experience overkill from just drawing too good of a card to finish off an enemy. The worst part is when you just need a little bit of damage, draw a negative, and then you have to waste another attack on them trying to kill them. Learn the monsters. Yes. Brought that number 15 up a bit. Yeah, guards. Now, there's more than just that. There's like the imps who have like, that annoying thing at 24, which ends up not necessarily being great, but it's where they strengthen a bunch of enemies, muddle a bunch of others, and they've got several other attacks falling between like 37 and 43 range, and then they've got that annoying 5er. Now, that's the imps. Now, start doing this with all monsters. You start to figure out the key cards. Now, when I specifically said when I was talking about the imps, there's a bunch of attacks between 37 and 43. You don't need to memorize all those, but you can at least learn that, hey, if they're going to be attacking, they're going to be somewhere in that range. Because their 24 is just a debuff, and their 5 is just a shield with no movement and no attack attached. You know that, hey, they can go at 5 and it might screw up our turns, so be prepared to do something else if they do draw 5. And if they do attack, we have until 37 to hit them. You may not necessarily have to do this for every monster, but maybe as you're going through the scenario, learning, try to keep in mind what numbers you've seen already and which ones were particularly annoying turns, because maybe you don't need to memorize that the guard's strength itself is on a 55, but you may need to learn that maybe they've got that annoying attack that poisons at initiative 15. They may drop before you and hit you hard before you can go and be like, oh, I thought they retaliated at 15. No, they've got 2 of those. The more you know about the monster decks, the less you'll be surprised as they start drawing some of those more annoying cards. Pay attention to your teammates. And this is what it depends on the party. I've had some parties where I try to communicate to them and be like, hey, I'm going to be attacking both of those guys, but I'm going to be going early, so don't get to them too soon because I'm going to splash some damage on them. And then I use backup ammunition, massive boulder. Some guy runs right next to both of them. I'm like, my dude, why did you do that? I'm going to do a couple damage to you. You're already at 5 health, now you're going to be down to 3. Why did you do that, Josh? And of course, Josh, wasn't paying attention to me, because Josh never pays attention to me, and it's very sad. Anyway, what is important, though, is if an enemy's trying to... 3-2. Anyway, what is important is if an ally's trying to communicate something to you, try to keep it in mind. They might say something like, don't worry, I'm long resting. Whatever. But if they say, hey, I need the fire element, maybe consider not using that fire element, or even saying, hey, what do you need it for? And just determining that. If an ally says they're going to be causing some friendly fire and you're at low health, maybe you don't want to be doing that. Or if an ally says, hey, guess what? I'm going to be giving all of you a bonus to attacks. You might want to say, yeah, well, what initiative? Because I might be able to use it. And do I need to be within a certain range of you? They may not say, you need to be within range too, but they may say, I'm going pretty early, but you need to be kind of close to me. You can do something with that. After you've picked cards, feel free to openly communicate strategy. Most of my turns, when we've been doing our playtests more commonly nowadays, the turn I have in mind, the exact hex I'm landing in and everything, changes based off of talking to my allies after cards have been revealed and positioning myself in a way that better benefits what my allies need to do, and that helps us just win scenarios more. Modify your hand for the scenario. Now, I know there's a lot of guides out there that are like, here's your hand for this level. Once you level up, drop this card and use this. Don't do that. Instead, get a pool of cards and learn which ones are conditional and sideboard cards. It's okay to pick a main hand and say, these are going to be my main things. But always, because sometimes people will be like, my class only has 1 loot and it's kind of a crappy card. And then you'll get to a scenario that says, in the rules text, before you pick your cards, that you need to loot 4 chests and they can only be looted with loot actions. If you deliberately don't take one, you might be reducing your party's chance of success significantly, especially if your whole group thinks, well, someone else is certainly going to bring a loot card, Josh. Don't worry, Josh would never not bring a loot card to a scenario. If you see there's going to be flame demons in the scenario, if you have Pierce, bring it. If you have the ability to do direct damage, bring it. If you see those annoying earth demons, perhaps you should be bringing that easy immobilize, especially if that immobilize uses earth and the earth demons are going to be infusing it during their turns. But there's so many ways you can tailor your hand to the scenario. That just makes it that much easier. Also, if you have a very powerful crowd control effect and you see it's a boss scenario, keep in mind most bosses are immune to a lot of effects and it may not be as useful. So just try to keep that in mind. If you draw a battle goal that says don't loot anything, maybe don't bring that loot card. And so on and so forth. You can tailor it to your battle goal. You can tailor it to help your personal quest. You can tailor it to the rules of the scenario. Just do whatever it is. Don't necessarily stick with one static hand. I hope all these tips helped, and I think it should help you at least keep some of these in mind to maybe become a more competent player, or maybe just to try something new and see if that new strategy works out good for you. If some of these tactics is something you traditionally do while playing already, let us know in the comments, see how that's been successful for you. Also, if you have some of your own suggestions, I'd love to hear them. Keep in mind, Frosthaven is coming soon. We will be doing some coverage on it. I have an unboxing video that I'm going to be showing off once we get the permission from the embargo. So I hope all of you have a absolutely wonderful day and so much luck for Frosthaven. Before I get to that, thank you to all our Inox tier subscribers. All of you are truly wonderful. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. If you want to support the channel, be sure to like and subscribe and or check out our Patreon. And if you just want to like ship post instead, consider checking out our Discord. Once again, thanks all of you patrons, you're awesome, and thanks all of you for watching.